Good evening, ladies and gentlemen. Welcome one, welcome all. My name is Daniel Brown. I'm one of the co-founders and directors at Electric Vehicle Association England. We are joined by a fantastic group of speakers here today, and this is a very, very exciting moment. We had our big launch yesterday. I'm very happy to announce that we've got over 100 members now at the Electric Vehicle Association England. We've been working hard for the last 12 months in the background to put together a really solid, scalable, clear, accessible organization for everybody to be participating in and feeding into. And hopefully, our intention is here today to give you a glimpse of some of what we've been working on, some of the campaigns we've been running, and some of what you can be expecting from EVA England in the next few months. So, first up, we have Michael Zdanowski, who is a consultant in the low carbon space, who I've known for a few years. Fantastic individual, and he ran a very helpful piece of work for us, profiling electric vehicle drivers and making sure their voices and their views were heard in the 2030 phase-out debate when the announcement came last November. After that, we'll be hearing from Sophie Lyons, who is the head of consumer experience at the government's Office for Zero Emission Vehicles. She is running a major consultation at the moment, asking drivers, asking groups like us, asking automotive manufacturers, what can be done to improve confidence in public charging infrastructure. So they're asking all the right questions on payments and reliability and maintenance. So we'll hear a bit more about the government's plans in this space. And then we'll go on to Role Naiminen, who is another director at Electric Vehicle Association and is particularly our industry lead, and Dr. Christina Hink, who is our lead researcher in this space, who are running a big survey of electric vehicle drivers, and we'll get a bit of an insight. That survey actually closes on Friday, so it's not quite done yet, but Christina has pulled together a bit of an insight as to what people are saying so far. And at the end, we'll have a nice question and answer period. So feel free to put questions in the chat box, throw them our way at any time, and then I'll be your MC for this evening. So I'll be organizing them and making sure that all the questions get raised at the end. Over to you, and welcome, Sophie. Lovely to have you here. But over to you, Michael. We'll get started with you.
Thanks very much, Daniel. Good afternoon, everyone. I'm Michael Zdanowski. I'm a communications consultant in the low carbon space, and I've spent over 15 years advising companies, governments and organisations in the energy sector, mainly for large communications agencies, including Edelman and Hill & Knowlton. I'm going to present today the key insights from a series of interviews that I conducted with over 40 electric vehicle drivers in November, December last year, as part of a study sponsored by EVA England, New Automotive and Octopus Energy. The study coincided with the government announcement of the phase out of the sale of new internal combustion engine vehicles by 2030. And at its heart had a simple objective: to find out why EV drivers had made the switch from a petrol or diesel to an EV, and to find out their experiences, good and bad, since making that change. So why is this important, and why am I speaking to you today? In short, we don't often hear the voices of EV drivers themselves. There is a frustrating lack of understanding in the media and indeed in the public about the availability, affordability and capabilities of today's EVs, let alone the EV drivers themselves. The study I conducted threw up some fascinating insights about EV drivers in the UK today, particularly those who had recently gone electric. The research showed the diversity of the EV drivers on the road today. The youngest interviewee as part of this study was 17. The oldest was in her late 70s. My research showed that the brave first adopters aren't the only drivers driving EVs at the moment. And EV drivers do not fit into one socioeconomic bracket, gender or age group. Rather, there is a rich mosaic of EV drivers in the UK that are buying and driving EVs for many different reasons. Indeed, the professions of the people I spoke to range from lawyer to dentist, rabbi to shoe designer, teacher to driving instructor, and from academic to sales manager and civil servant. And I've broken the findings of this research into 5 different insights, which I'll run through now. So insight 1, just building on that last point, EV drivers are a diverse group with many different motivations for buying an EV. EV drivers come from a range of different backgrounds and ages. Their decision to buy an EV centered upon the benefits of EV driving primarily, and wasn't based simply on the tired cliche of just saving the planet. Many EV drivers I spoke to were retirees in their 50s, 60s and 70s. They had chosen to buy an EV as the price point was now reasonable. But another factor was the driving experience. Driving an EV meant that they didn't need to make constant gear changes. Several retirees stated that the EV driving experience was much less stressful on the body and mind than a normal car because of the noise-free journey. And this had emboldened some of them to consider holidaying abroad in their EV, whereas they wouldn't have previously with their old petrol or diesel. Indeed, one retired couple I interviewed was planning on driving their EV on holiday to southern Spain post-pandemic, as the driving experience made the length of journey feasible. Another couple planned to drive for a holiday to Greece in their EV when possible. An EV driving grandmother said that her new Peugeot E208 was much better for her arthritis than her old car. And nearly every EV driver I spoke to mentioned the smoothness of the drive and the quietness of the vehicle. Several drivers I interviewed were mid-career professionals who drove EVs, as it meant that they could commute into central London without using public transport and without paying a fortune in congestion charging or parking. Another interviewee was a self-confessed eco-rabbi who bought an EV as it was a convenient and sustainable way for him to visit those in his community in North London. For another EV driver in her 70s, savings were important, and she proudly mentioned that she could drive from her home in Torquay to London and back for less than £20 worth of electricity charge. So in conclusion, one, the first adopters are still there, but the base of EV owners is much wider than is currently commonly portrayed by the media. And the growth of this wide base will only accelerate further. Insight 2, EV drivers are finding amazing deals out there. And this shows that EVs aren't necessarily more expensive than petrol or diesel vehicles or the preserve of the middle classes or rich. Portraying EVs as bank-busting luxury no longer reflects the reality of the market. Many of the EV drivers I interviewed had brokered fantastic deals to land their EV. Some had even bought second or even third-hand EVs at a fraction of their original cost, and also on PCP deals. One EV driver I spoke to had negotiated to buy a second-hand Nissan Leaf on a PCP agreement for £120 per month, an incredible deal, particularly when you think that on top of that, his electricity charging costs were no more than £20 per month. Drivers were quick to mention that their new EVs not just delivered a better driving performance, but presented them with major savings on their fuel costs, sometimes as much as a couple of £100 per month. Moreover, EV servicing costs are cheaper than for a regular combustion engine vehicle, on average £60 per year compared to up to £300 for a normal petrol or diesel car. So therefore, it's a myth that EVs are always more expensive than petrol or diesel cars when you look at all of the different EV purchasing options. Insight 3, EV drivers use their vehicle as a bridge to integrating other sustainable technologies at home and at work. One of the most impressive learnings from the study was that buying an EV had made many people think more carefully about where they source their energy from and how to live sustainably. Many EV drivers I spoke to naturally wanted to ensure that their vehicle was charged by renewable energy. Many therefore quickly navigated to the leading renewable energy tariffs guaranteeing renewable energy. And it was clear that there were many good deals out there. Some drivers went further. They were quick to point out that they wanted to charge their EV with their own energy and therefore kitted out the roofs of their homes with solar panels, enabling them to charge their cars for free. Several drivers pointed out that they had made money by selling surplus energy in their EV back to the grid. And they were eager to do this, not just from a money-saving perspective, but also because they hated the thought of wasting surplus energy. And therefore, a holistic approach to a low-carbon future seemed to be endemic among the interviewees. Insight number 4. It was clear that EV drivers are extremely resourceful about charging and don't just charge at home. They're a resourceful bunch. Though every one of the EV drivers I spoke to had the option of charging their EV from home, many used the existing public infrastructure as often it was still free or at least very low cost. For example, one enterprising EV driver I spoke to charged his vehicle for free at public chargers at a service station on the M1 near his home, rather than charge on his own driveway. Other drivers plugged in their EVs at their place of work, receiving a free charge ready for the journey home. Many of the EV drivers I spoke to plan their shopping trips around the availability of chargers and whether the respective shopping centre, supermarket, leisure centre or theme park has chargers. EV charging infrastructure therefore could become a key competitive advantage for British retail parks trying to get back on their feet later this year. However, EV drivers mostly acknowledge that there should be more chargers out there. Some mention that chargers don't work occasionally, and this has been an issue during the various lockdowns of the past year, as they haven't been repaired as quickly as in the past. But in a further indication of the resourcefulness of EV drivers, many EV drivers have overcome this problem by hooking up with other EV drivers through online networks to offer them free charges at their driveways when they need to increase their range at short notice. So charging, while far from perfect, just isn't the issue that many detractors claim it to be. The fifth insight is that EV drivers simply will be drivers by the end of this decade, and this shift is already happening, and it's far more fundamental than people realise. My research showed that people buy and run EVs for a combination of rational and emotional reasons: the environment and clean air, cost savings on fuel and servicing, technology benefits, performance, comfort, and even lifestyle reasons. But far from wanting to stand out, EV drivers aim to fit in, and they were all comfortable with their choice. For certain, there'll be a petrol legacy, as some will hang on to their old petrol or diesel vehicles into the 2030s. But my research indicated that there'll be many more people driving a cheaper to run, better EV alternative. And as my study showed, people will realise that an EV can help them eliminate perhaps up to 75% of the cost of refuelling. As one person put it to me during the study, going from a petrol or diesel to an EV was like going from a landline to a smartphone. Thank you.
Fabulous, Michael. I think the key point that stands out to me in all that is that 2030 has crystallized everything in everybody's minds, and that very soon EV drivers will just be drivers. One of the things in talking to government about this is, and other external stakeholders, is that it's just such a rapidly moving profile of who EV drivers are, what they look like, what they do, and what their age is, their income is. So I think having research on hand and profiles like this on hand that are accurate and up to date is a really, really helpful initiative. And then also the work that was done on the back of it as well, to make sure that their voices are heard in the media debate around the 2030, I think was really, really helpful, just making sure that at the end of the day, there's a human at the other end of this transition. And by and large, the humans have some problems with the charging network and have some problems with the vehicles themselves and certainly the insurance. But at the end of the day, people overwhelmingly love these. And there's kinks to work out, but we've got a huge base of really, really passionate people behind this transition. Sophie, from the perspective of the government and the Office for Zero Emission Vehicles, recently renamed, congratulations. You have launched a huge consultation, very wide-ranging on all sorts of different issues in the public charging space. Before we go into the detail of that, maybe you can just give listeners an insight. So what is the government really trying to achieve with this? What's the problem that you're trying to solve?
So this work is really focusing on how do we hit our 2030 targets and understand the pain points for the consumer. So we know that there's been like a dramatic increase in uptake of electric vehicles, but there are still hurdles that we need to solve before the consumers, like the mass market consumers, and so not just the early adopters and innovators, automatically think of an electric vehicle as their next car, that the public charging infrastructure is good enough, that it's reliable as like going to a petrol or diesel pump. So it's removing sort of any of those barriers that are commonly seen to uptake EVs, and to start to like tick them off the list and say for every consumer that, yeah, it is a reliable car.
Perfect. So improving confidence, or making sure that everybody is sort of, ready and willing to go electric with their next vehicle. So talk us through it. What's the consultation proposing? What's the government thinking about in relation to charging infrastructure? How might the government be improving confidence?
So there's 4 core areas in the consultation, but in no particular order. Those are data, so improving payment methods when a consumer gets to the charge point. So there's 2 sort of sub-elements to this. So there is payment roaming, and making it easier for consumers to pay through a smart app, smart technology, but also without the use of smart technology. So you can turn up to a charge point, tap and go, or however you choose to pay. To improve the pricing transparency, so to pick a single metric, and so consumers can compare the price that they're paying across the public network. And then the last one is to improve the reliability of the network, so consumers can understand what charge point is working, is it not, and what are their needs. So those are the 4 core areas, and I'll go through them in a little bit more detail, but we also have 3 additional areas. So there is signage, there's weatherproofing and lighting, and there's also accessibility for disabled users. So the first one that I'll run through is open charge point data, and we're all talking about the public domain here, so we're also not focusing necessarily on smart right now. This is more of your sort of turn up to a charge point, pay and walk away. So open data is essential for locating your charge point, understanding is it working, and understanding the different features that the consumer might want to know. Is it rapid? Is it slow? What is the price at that charge point? The consumer doesn't really care about the data itself or open data, but they want the product from the data. So whatever they actually choose, sort of whatever features the innovators, charge point operators might wish to show the end consumer. And we're not looking to so we're looking to mandate OCPI as a data standard. So to make sure that actually no matter who is in the market, that it's all held to a certain standard, and we know sort of what the data is behind the scenes. And we're also looking at how this is released. So is there a mechanism already in use that we can tap into? Sort of, we know there's huge amounts of work. I mean, data is the buzzword at the moment. So is there something that already exists in industry that we can tap onto? So we're looking at the modernising energy data work, but we're also looking at TfL. There's a huge range of work going on in this space. Or do we need to create something in DFT, or can we align with other bits of work? So we're aiming to do something that is cross-cutting as possible.
So the end output of that data work particularly could be a bit like TfL, where I can go onto Google, I can go onto any other kind of app, and I know that the train is 4 minutes late, but that's because Google makes some basic information available, and it makes it free to everybody. And that's sort of what the government's trying to do here.
Exactly. Yeah, and it's a core focus. If you have open data, then it makes it starts to pull all of these other strands of work together. So you can see the pricing, you can see if it's reliable, or what does that mean to the consumer. It's the crux of all of these other different components. So the next one we're looking at is, how do we make it easy for consumers to pay? I mean, this is one of the top issues for consumers, apart from reliability, is that actually how do they choose to pay? Is that through contactless? Is that through an RFID card? Consumers need to have like a common way to pay, and actually an app is often a good way to use. But the problem is, at the moment, is that you need a different app for different charge point operators. And considering there's 49 at the moment, I mean, there are definitely some moves in the right direction, but there are we need to potentially give the market a nudge, and we're looking at okay, well, what do we need to do in that space to ensure that consumers just have a seamless experience, that they don't have 8 different apps on their phone. The next one is pricing transparency, and probably one of the less contentious ones, about mandating pence per kilowatt hour. So I know a number of charge point operators offer their pricing in pence per 5 minutes, pence per half an hour. However, that's really difficult for the consumer to understand, well, what is that price compared to other charging networks? How do you pick the right charge point to pay out? Because actually, what is your final bill going to be? And then the last one is, of the four core elements, is reliability. What do we define as reliable? What, is it the charge point is working, perfectly? There's the front end display sort of a bit as a offline? Is the payment system offline? Do you need to pay through the app? Has the cable got stuck? What do we mean by this? And sort of actually, how do we make a charge point reliable enough that it's not fatal for the consumer to sort of stop charging or to have a failed charging experience? And it's to really, the aim for this one is also to drive a positive narrative. I mean, the negative narrative is quite strong. So actually making the charging network reliable and to make the consumers sort of want to use and dropping sort of those breadcrumbs that, yes, you can turn up to a charge point anywhere across the country and it's working, or you can see that it's not, or if you have one that's suitable for your needs, then actually when you turn up to that, that you can have a successful charging experience. So all of this, bringing all of this work together, this should give the consumers a more positive experience over the coming years. And it's dropping those breadcrumbs to say, yes, an EV will be my next car. We're not thinking about petrol or diesel. We're not worried about sort of the range, because I know, as I'm driving up to Scotland or going over to France, whenever that may be, that actually I can find a working charge point and that I don't have to worry sort of about making either sort of many different stops or just trying to find that working charge point. But actually consumers know that they'll be able to keep on driving and get to their destination quickly and easily. So yeah, those are the four areas. And we've also got 3 other areas that we're having a call for evidence to understand, well, what do we need to do next? So these are about signage. Do we need more signage on the roads? Do we need more lighting around charge points? What does that look like? Do we need weatherproofing, so a canopy over the top of the charge point, so more like a little hub that you would see sort of at each charge point? And then we're looking at also accessibility. So what do we need to do for disabled users with visible and non-visible disabilities? And we're also sort of in parallel doing some work with Motability and BSI to start to create a suite of standards. So what do we define as accessible charging? Can we have that? Can we use those that one standard that we can all baseline? Sort of, is it the weight of the cable? Is it the force of the cable? Having to plug that in. What does that look like? So these strands should all come together for any user to be able to use a public charge point super easily and wherever they are in the UK.
Fantastic. So I think these are all issues that drivers have huge have done a lot of thinking about. And the survey that we'll move on to with Christina shortly sort of indicates that there are very, very passionate positions amongst the drivers community on a lot of this. And I think some of the issues are really also around safety as well, making sure charge points work and people don't get stranded. What's a good way for drivers to feed in their views to all this? What's, from you as government, what's a helpful and constructive sort of way forward? How can people engage with this?
So we've had over, I think it's probably over 1,300 responses already to the consultation. Please feed into that. I would suggest if you please do respond to that. We're going through every response and with like 45 questions or so. But we're also doing a lot of work with the AA, New Automotive, EVA England. Sort of, we've got so many surveys out to pull together. So if you see a survey from some of these bodies, respond to that as well. We're going to continue that work to understand what do users actually need and get to these areas are very nuanced. So these questions are evolving over time as we understand actually what is the consumer journey at the charge point, what the actions that are taken to help us build our policies. So I suggest please do feedback into the consultation, but also do take part in these surveys. We do take action from these results.
Fantastic. All right, very helpful, Sophie. Thank you. Dr. Christina Hink, over to you to give a bit of an intro to the survey that EVA England has been running and to give us a bit of an insight as to what the early results are.
Sorry, I'm both adminning the webinar as well as talking, so I'm trying to now spotlight myself, which I don't seem to be able to, but that's okay. So as Daniel mentioned, I'm the operations manager at EVA England, and I do a lot of the research and analysis behind the surveys that we've run. So to date, we've run one behind the phase out date, arguing and lobbied for a 2030 phase out date, new petrol, diesel cars and vans, some of which Michael has talked about, additional work that we did with Michael around the phase out date. Currently, we are running a survey. To date, we have, let's see, 1,174 responses so far. That was as of lunchtime today. And we're specifically interested in kind of current drivers and their current experience behind and when using public charge points. And so, as to be expected, we have 95% BEV drivers have taken the survey so far, and 5% are plug-in hybrid drivers. One of the other things that we've asked to get kind of a better sense of how frequently people are relying on public charging and if this somehow will kind of influence their answers, we've asked if they have access to off-street parking, and 91% have said yes, that they do have access to off-street parking. One of the key things we kind of wanted to know is just some as well, like general perceptions around using the public charging network. And so one of the questions we asked were, how often do you feel concerned over finding public charge points? And these kind of range from often to sometimes are the more popular answers right now. And then seldom is about 20%, and only 5.9% have said that they never feel concerned about finding public charge points. So we, around kind of the four themes that Sophie mentioned, we have asked pretty extensively about how people would prefer to access and therefore pay for a charge at a public charge point. And so the most common ways that people have accessed in the past, I think, as we all expect, smartphone app, an RFID card, or a contactless credit or debit card. When asked kind of the easiest way to access a charge point, it was by far kind of a contactless credit or debit card, followed actually surprisingly by surprising to me, a subscription service, and then an RFID card. And then we found that most would welcome the ability to actually use what they picked as the easiest method across all kind of public charge points. We also broke it down into destination charge points as well as rapid charge points. I think our initial hypothesis was kind of that there might be difference in preference, but actually it came down to most drivers prefer to pay with a contactless credit or debit card, is what we're finding so far, followed by a smartphone app and then RFID card. I would say though most have agreed that they would prefer to have kind of multiple options when paying for a charge. So we talked about kind of the ability to use one smartphone app across all networks, and most would prefer that. That's 87% right now. And then 72% would also welcome the ability to use one RFID card across all networks. Again, we were talking about making, charge points more accessible and user-friendly. I think these are some of our key early findings that do indicate what current EV drivers who are currently experiencing public charging, what they're leaning towards. Overwhelming, so kind of pricing transparency and payment format, another key theme of the consultation. Overwhelmingly, it's a price per kilowatt hour is the most preferred so far with 91.2%, which again, might not be surprising for all of you. And then that was followed by 2.7% with a charge for time spent charging, or pence per minute. So some of the kind of to sum up where we are to date, again, the survey is still ongoing. So these are just some of the top line results that we have so far. But kind of the typical issues, and this is in order of frequency that people are experiencing, is when they find a public charge point, oftentimes they will have to find another charge point because either the charge point was out of order, the charge point could not be easily activated. The charge point would not connect with the car. Some have experienced long queues. Others have experienced that the charge point was inaccessible or did not have a suitable payment option. And then kind of lastly, charge point could not be easily located. But the majority have experienced actually having to choose a different charge point than the one that was originally intended, which I think is kind of one of the key insights. And then also a bit to what Sophie said earlier, we did ask if people preferred to use charge points under some sort of covering or canopy, and predominantly yes. So these are just a few of the findings that we have so far, and what we'll do with the responses is kind of amalgamate them into a report. All data will be kept anonymous, and then that report will feed into our consultation response to government on kind of behalf of the EV drivers that have participated with us so far.
Perfect. Thank you, Christina. So that's a great insight, very, very helpful. So Role, given as a director at EVA England, you drive a Kia e-Niro, is that right?
No, I have a Hyundai Ioniq at the moment.
Aha, of course.
I've gone through quite a few different vehicles.
So as a sort of a long-time EV driver here, what's your sort of feeling about the survey results that are coming out? So does this all sit right to you?
Yeah, there's nothing really surprising. I think that those are sort of logical when you live with an EV day to day. Then that seems to be quite sort of expected results so far.
Okay, fair enough. And your role within EVA England as well is a sort of industry lead. So just to give everybody a sense for what the different board members are doing, can you give us a quick summary as to what the kind of thing you're working on at the moment?
Yeah, so I work at the moment mainly on partnerships. So we want to provide our members with different services and different benefits, and obviously the obvious ones are the advocacy work that we do, the policy work, but then we also want to provide some very tangible benefits as well. So at the moment, from launch, we've got two membership discounts. One of them is with Right Charge, and we also have a program going with Onto, who are a electric vehicle subscription service. And obviously Right Charge, they do things like a comparison site for chargers and installers. So very, very apt for an EV driver. And what I'm working on now is obviously trying to expand that offering, and I'm working with multiple different businesses at the moment for future expansion of our offering along the lines of insurance, leasing, and things like that. So work in progress, but hopefully we'll hear about that on our website and in our member communication soon.
Yeah, perfect. So on one hand, we've got the work of Christina, which is very much advocacy focused, research, helping Sophie make good decisions. We've got Michael's work as well, which is very much around research, advocacy, making sure the narrative is going well within the media. And then your piece, this is just making sure that for that 20 quid a year, you know that as a member, you're more than getting that back in sort of cables or insurance or your first home charger.
Exactly.
Okay, perfect. Are there any other sort of pieces of this consultation that really stand out to you as a driver, Role? Anything around weatherproofing or signage? Is there anything that's sort of off the mark or sort of not necessarily needed, or have they done a pretty good job highlighting all the issues?
I think that it's been pretty good. Obviously, we are a group of EV drivers. So when we've been discussing this and looking at what the key things to ask are come from a personal experience. Like you said, that I've been driving an EV since 2018, and in that time there's been different kinds of charging experiences. Although I've never really had a nightmare journey, but when you listen to other drivers, when you read stories online, those happen as well. So I think that it's the the topics covered in the consultation and the questions being asked by different us and other organizations have been quite to the point, and hopefully they will yield some usable, actionable insights for the government.
Perfect. All right. So I'm going to open up a couple questions here. So to any of the participants, if they want to drop questions into the chat box, I will MC and sort of poke them a couple of different ways. So I've got one question here, and maybe this is a good one to start off with. Back to you, Role. Is, I know the session relates to England, but are there equivalent organisations for Scotland and Wales? Wales is dear to me, and sort of a comment on sort of more charging on the motorways. So is there sort of similar bodies evolving, and sort of also maybe answering the wider question, why EVA England specifically?
Yeah, so that's actually a very, very good point. From when I first started getting involved in EVA, it's actually predates the EVA England. I went to quite a few EV conferences in 2019, and I there as a participant, I realized, okay, the government, the industry, the media were well represented, but there wasn't actually an English-based organization representing the consumers. So I started looking around, and I found EVA Scotland, which is a well-established organization, has been around for I think coming up to 10 years this year. And I contacted them to see, okay, what about England? Do I need to live north of the border to get involved in a advocacy organization for EV drivers? And they then actually very luckily pointed me to one of our fellow board members, Alan Cooklin, who had been on his side looking at this topic as well, and that's how we eventually got started, or I got involved in that as well. And yes, there are organizations in Northern Ireland. I think that we can. I don't have the exact link in mind where they can be found, but they are building their organization, and there's also development in Wales. But also there is a number of local and regional clubs which are sort of more cross-branded ones, and then there are brand clubs as well. But yeah, obviously there's now us as an established organization in England, one in Scotland, one in Northern Ireland, and development in Wales.
Perfect. Yeah, and I think one of the original ideas with EVA England exactly is to sort of not replicate any of the existing brilliant work that's going on, but really try and sort of organize it in a way that it's super tangible and clear to government, and we're sort of one stakeholder that's sort of quite easy to manage, depending on the area they're looking at.
Absolutely, and we're working very closely with the existing other organizations, and hopefully we can be sort of a collection point for views from different organizations and directed from England, and obviously we're working very closely with the other devolved the organizations in the devolved areas of the country.
Yeah. So Michael, one question from you, or there's two questions I'll blend together for you. From your experience in talking to drivers, profiling drivers as well, getting a sense for the huge diversity that's out there, we've got two comments about are there good solutions for people without off-street parking? People are sort of mentioning that sometimes chargers are out of use, they're blocked, there's a petrol diesel car icing the spot. So what are some of the experiences with the public charging side that your profiled users have?
Yeah, great question. And I would just refer to one of the insights I made about the resourcefulness of EV drivers, because there were several EV drivers that didn't have access to easy off-street parking, and consequently had just sought different solutions. So somebody had, for example, bought an EV but lived in a flat, Because the purchasing decision was actually based on the fact that the town in which they lived and worked had some really great charging, and it was actually up in Scotland. It was the city of Dundee. And so this person had full confidence that she could charge her electric vehicle whenever she wanted. It just wasn't, the charger wasn't right there in front of her building. But if you think about your petrol or diesel vehicle, no one has a petrol station right next to their house in any case. So, you know, it was one of those things where you've just got to kind of, you know, seek another solution and become comfortable with it. Additionally, we had lots of people who stated that though they had their own driveway and had their own charger, they rarely used it because there was so much free charging in supermarkets, leisure centres, motorway service stations, which again suggests to me that you don't necessarily need your own parking, your own sort of off-street parking. And where someone hasn't got sort of the opportunity to put their charger right next to, you know, they don't have their own driveway perhaps, but they've got a place further down the street. People have run cables, for example, from their house just along the street to their car. So that represents another solution, which I hope we can address long term. But again, it just suggests that people, when there's sort of where there's a will, there's a way.
Perfect. Probably not the ideal or the long-term solution, but definitely
not the long-term solution, but certainly they thought it's this idea of resourcefulness. So I think once the chargers are rolled out more effectively, we'll overcome that.
I think that's one of the things I've been hearing as well. Just the amount of the scale of activity in this space is so huge. The rate of charge point deployment is so high that I think that we're going to be in a very different situation in about a year or two. We've got, thank you, Michael. We've got one or two questions here now as well about home charging particularly. So as an EVA England member, there's a couple of different pieces. So it's open to current and prospective EV drivers. And one of the big pieces of research that Christina sort of did and then delivered is a 45-page membership pack around this is how you drive, this is what the vehicle looks like, these are all the ins and outs and all the insider tips on getting your charger, right? How do we make this as easy, you know, for people as possible? So Christina, and then over to Role. Christina, during the process of that, what were some of the home charger tips or tricks that you sort of found? What's the average amount of time do you think it takes for somebody to get a home charger? And then I'll ask the same question to Role about your experience in getting your first home charger.
No, that's an excellent question about a home charger. And I would say from the start, the number one tip is to plan ahead. I think a lot of people think, you know, I bought my EV, you know, I'll have my home charger the next day, it'll all be fine. It actually probably takes about 6 weeks for you to get a home charger. And I would also recommend, there's so many considerations as well. But probably one of my favorite ones is that you fundamentally have to love the way it looks. You're going to see it every day. So pick a charger that you like the look of. But do plan that it is going to take about 6 weeks and that it should be performed by a qualified installer. You can check out, there's some great resources out there that will direct you the right way. Right Charge right now, as Role mentioned, is one of our partners. And they have a kind of a smart home charger EV tariff matching tool that you can do, and it'll find you the perfect home charger based on your car, the make, the year, and kind of what suits your needs. You can also check out the EV consumer code or EVCC and see if there's a list of kind of an EVCC approved installer near you to make sure that you're getting kind of the best service possible, really. And then also one of my favorite things about the EVCC as well is that actually, you know, if there's some sort of dispute, you know, heaven forbid something goes wrong, they'll actually step in and kind of go to bat for you. So those are kind of the top tips for getting a home charger.
Perfect. And Role, what was your first experience like? Just to give people a bit of insight as to what they can expect.
Yeah, I'm not sure how stereotypical my situation was, because we got our EV in the spring of 2018, and we were supposed to move into a newly built house in the summer. But then, as so often happens, there was a delay. That was first couple of weeks, then 6 weeks, then 8 weeks. So I actually ended up having quite a bit of time to pre-arrange it. So we ordered it when we had the sort of final deadline for moving in, and then it was installed about a week and a half after we moved into our new house. But that was obviously prior to that, I had to be using the 3-pin travel charger, and I was obviously using public charging a lot at that point. But the installation process itself, it was through the leasing company and the manufacturer it was part of their project or program to provide chargers at a discounted price. So that was very easy for me as a consumer to do it. It just was a question of having the right time and having a house built where they could install it.
Perfect. All right. So I've got one more question here. And this is probably one back for Sophie, and I actually might combine these two if that's okay, Sophie. So we've got one from Joel and one from Gary. So Gary's asking about disability access to public charge points. How much of a priority does government see this, and how are you guys going about, I know it's in the consultation, but how are you going about sort of classifying and organizing this kind of work? Is there kind of like a clear vision that government has for what this is going to look like for drivers who have disabilities in a year or 2 years? And then the other question is around home charge point sharing. Is this something you think is going to catch on? Is it something the government is supportive of?
Yeah. So on the accessibility work, this is already in the consultation. So we're asking questions about sort of, what definitions do we need to use? Where are the big problems that we're seeing with accessible access to all charge points? And this can be for visible and non-visible disabilities. But we also need to consider actually who's going to charge at the charge point. It might not necessarily be the driver. So we need to consider a whole range of different scenarios. So this is something that we're working really closely on with Motability. And actually, even though it's in the consultation, we are kicking off a work stream sort of over the coming weeks to understand actually how do we ensure that there's some standardized way of measuring what do we mean by accessible, because right now it's completely up to industry knowledge, and there's no sort of way to measure this against or even give that consistent information to consumers. And so this is something that I'm really passionate about, to making this happen and just to giving industry like some common ground and to say, okay, do you need a different height? Do you need a drop curb? What do the consumers need, and sort of finding your best fit, because realistically there's so many different locations for charge points. It's not like petrol stations, they can literally be anywhere. So actually, do you need to pick and choose sort of what suits your needs? And as well, if we do this earlier, then sort of it makes life easier. So later in the 2020s to retrofit any of this. So this is why sort of we've got this in the consultation, but we're also progressing this work sort of over the next year, and hopefully to get some BSI standards in place over the next year. And then on the home charging point, this is a really interesting, nuanced little topic. So yes, if the so we're capturing sort of if charge point is available to publicly charge, then we're looking at opening up data for that charge. So where is it located? The interesting element with this is actually home charging. If you are able to park at someone's property and able to charge there, actually sort of is that defined as a public charge point, and so, or is it still home charging? So I'm working, there isn't an answer really to this yet. We're looking at sort of what do we need to do going forward, because I know there's a lot of organisations out there right now, and I work very closely with sort of some of our sister teams which deal mainly with home charging, and so to understand, well, actually how do we connect that data to start off with, and then actually what do we need to do to make sure the consumers can find that as well, because I'm I'm all about what is the end consumer experience? Can they find, again, the right charge point for them? Can they get around? Is it like a small driveway? Can they get around that site? Or is it going to be really impractical for users? What else do we need to, what other information do we need to give the user? So we're sort of very early on in that space, but what we're doing at the moment is just making sure that, yes, if we want to have all of that open or not, or part of that information, can we connect it all together?
Perfect. So home charger sharing, an emerging trend, keeping an eye on supporting and on the disability access, quantifying, breaking it down, putting in place standards, and then making sure people are confident. I think that's really helpful. So hopefully, Gary, hopefully that answers your question there. It's sort of the action is being taken and it's very much on the radar. One more quick question for you, Sophie, now that I've got you. Martin is asking about tax, and I know this is outside of your sort of brief, strictly on sort of incentives and the experience of consumers at chargers and with their vehicles. But there is a lot in the media at the moment around road tax, vehicle tax. You know, what's the future going to look like? Is the government going to tackle this year, do you think? Is there going to be a big look into this?
Whether it's this year, unsure. But I know there's a lot of work going on with sort of road tax grants and sort of what the long-term strategy might be. We're looking to publish our infrastructure strategy sort of next steps sort of later this year, where we'll look to understand sort of the future, you know, sort of the rollout of charge points. But then we're working really closely with other departments, including Treasury. I know that this is up in the air right now, and I unfortunately can't give you any concrete dates or any information, but I know it's the hot topic right now. So as soon as we get the information, we'll be pushing that out in the public domain.
Perfect. Michael, over to you. Do you have any comments from your research on the home charging side or any of the themes that we've just gone through?
Not really. To be perfectly honest, I think I've presented most of them, but I mean, all of the issues and the questions that have been brought up really interesting and all were sort of related to the research I conducted back at the end of last year. But I think more my sort of concluding remarks would be there should be much more focus actually on EV drivers themselves and their evolving views of how they find the infrastructure and also the cars themselves, because they're the greatest advocates for the EV rollout. And I think it's just disappointing that often the media view the EV space in a slightly negative way. And actually it could be a fantastic opportunity to clean our air, make our cities more accessible, create jobs and all of the other great things about EVs just need to be talked about a bit more. So it was great to be part of this discussion today. Perfect.
Matt, before I answer your question on the EVCC, do we have any wrap-up comments from Sophie, from Christina, from Roland, just in terms of what people can expect and the direction of travel? Sophie?
Yeah, so I mean, we are closing our consultation in early April, and we want as much feedback as possible, and sort of to continue that engagement. I think consumers at the heart and of what we're doing, but sort of the more we get that positive message out as well, sort of the better to encourage EV uptake, and sort of the more support we'll have and the more understanding of what the actual need is from the consumer. So I would definitely point people to responding to the consultation, but also if you see surveys, if you want to give us more information, please do. Sort of we're all ears.
Perfect. Christina?
Yeah, kind of similar to what Sophie said. As we've mentioned earlier, we are currently running our survey. And so if you haven't had already and you are taking that already and you are an EV driver, then this is kind of one way that you can have a say. And that'll be running until Friday at midnight. at which point I'm very, very excited to get to crunch the data and produce a report. In closing remarks, if you haven't taken the survey, please take the survey. Also, just in general, thank you for attending tonight. Those are my final.
Perfect. And Role?
Yeah, I just actually wanted to sort of continue from what pretty much everybody has said, that the voices of the EV drivers is the key, because obviously we as the founding members are EV drivers, EV enthusiasts, and we are trying to connect to the sort of wider EV landscape as much as we can, but more active members we have who will bring in their particular use cases and share their views with us, the more power and knowledge we create into our organization, and then we can work with Sophie and Michael and other stakeholders in this environment to make the EV drivers' voice heard. So that's the whole founding principle of EVA England, that we want to be a membership organization that works for its members.
Perfect. Thank you, Role. So I'll answer Matt's question, and then I'll do a little wrap up. So Matt, how does the EV consumer code fit in with the EVA? So that's a separate industry-led scheme, but the intention for that code is to make it really easy for people who want home charge points to find really reputable installers. So the code, if you're an installer and you are a member of the code, it means that you've got all the right warranties and all the right practices in place. So it's still a growing one, but I think there's national coverage of that code now. So if anybody's looking for a home charging installer, that'd be a good place to start, electric vehicle consumer code. And then from my perspective, I just want to say, so all of us on the EVA board, we're all volunteers. We're all paying members of EVA as well. We've all paid our £20 dues as of yesterday. And thank you to the 94 others who have also now paid their dues. It's very, very exciting. Before we really went down this path, back in sort of May, June last year, we did a big piece of research, right? So we went out and talked to the Spanish, the Norwegian, the Dutch, the Scottish electric vehicle associations, those representing EV drivers. And we got a sense for the do's and the don'ts. We talked to government, we talked to industry, and there was a really clear requirement. Everybody said, what we need is something that is independently funded, that is for consumers, and sort of with industry and government to step back, that is able to really robustly represent consumer interests and consumer needs. Because we've got this top table here, right? So we've got sitting around the table, energy suppliers and grid networks and government and treasury, but there was a real need for an organized, independent, funded consumer voice up there to sense check all these policies and all these decisions that are being made. So one of the things that we'll be doing is sort of try and fill that seat at the top table. Another thing is we're going to get really local and empower people who are passionate in their communities to, for example, get involved in local elections. And how do you approach your council about putting in place an EV strategy or EV procurement for charge points? So we want to make sure that people are really able to contribute in their local communities. And then the work of Role is also going to be absolutely instrumental, making sure that everybody's able to access discounted products and services. And then Christina's role, which is, I'm a new EV driver, or I've just adopted, or I'm renting this thing. What do I do? Well, we've got really good research, how-to guides. This is your piece of work that you print off, or you put on your Kindle and you keep it in your car. And then it's like, okay, how do I sort of access my Type 2 versus my CHAdeMO? Well, that's page 24. So resources, guides, advocacy, empowerment, services, we're really here to sort of drive this transition more quickly. So we're at 6 p.m. Thank you all for your time today. Thank you for our excellent panelists and speakers, and look out for further webinars from EVA England. Thank you.
Thank you.